And welcome back to Everyday Faith Radio. This is Jeff Gaffney, your host, and with us back on the program, I got him back. My friend Kevin Wirt is back for part 2. Kevin, you're the only guest who's ever done back-to-back interviews. I thank you so much for being available and coming on the program.
Yeah, wow. Thanks, Jeff. I feel honored to be the first back-to-back guest.
Back-to-back. We had so much fun last week on the program, and I want to dive in and, all my quote-unquote radio training has taught me that I'm supposed to kind of warm up the guest a little bit and ask you some easy questions. I'm not doing that today, so I'm asking for forgiveness. I'm getting right into a deep and heavy question.
Yes.
You ready?
Sure.
All right. Can you share with our listeners a time when your faith helped carry you through a very difficult circumstance?
Yeah, Jeff, it was undoubtedly the time 20 years ago this coming December. My stepfather was killed in a tragic car accident. Actually, my mom was with him. Thankfully, she survived the accident, spent the night in the hospital for observation. But yes, my stepfather was tragically killed in a car accident just a few days after my third son was born in Richmond. And my parents were on their way from Roanoke to Richmond so that I could bring my wife and new baby home. And they can stay with my other 2 children at the house. And so I'm waiting on my parents to get there, and I get this phone call, and I'll never forget it. I get this phone call from a gentleman down in the Amelia County area, and he worked the accident with the rescue squad or fire department down there, and he said, Kevin, he said, your parents have been in a bad car accident. And he said, your mom said for you to go to the hospital, bring your wife and baby home, and that was about it. And I said, are they okay? And he said, well, your dad's been hurt really bad. But he let me know that my mom was okay, but I knew that my dad was in a very critical condition. They med-flighted him to MCV, and he died on arrival. So, yeah.
Talk to me about how Jesus shows up for you in the middle of kind of that whole pain and suffering. Where was Jesus during that for you?
Yeah, it was. Someone overheard someone say the other day about life being unfair, and when I got the report that he had died on arrival there, actually the gentleman that I was working with for a ministry to business people there, Needles in Richmond, had gone. I had called him. I said, can you please go to the hospital and check on my dad? He's being med-flighted to MCV. I'm going to get my wife and baby and bring them home. And so he did. And so as we got home from the hospital with the new baby, and we had a friend stay with the kids, he drove into the parking lot and got out of his vehicle, and I thought, wow, he's showing up early here. He got here fast. It must be good news. And I just assumed wrongly, obviously. And he said, Kevin, I'm sorry. And it just was the deepest, darkest day of my life. And I just said, and I cried out, I said, it's not fair. I said, it's just not fair.
Especially, here's your father coming to serve you.
And celebrate a new birth.
Right.
Yeah. It was just tragic. Thankfully, Jeff, they had been there the day that the baby had been born. This is my son, Brighton. They had been there the day he was born, and they had seen him, and we had celebrated. And the last memory I have of my stepdad is when they left us to go back to Roanoke that night. We hugged and said we loved each other, and that was the last memory I had of him. So I chose not to see him at the hospital at MCV after he had died. I chose not to do that. I chose not to see him at the funeral home either. So I wanted my last memory to be of that hug and those last words that we said.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of parachuting myself into your story 20 years ago, and I'm just getting a little taste of how you've got such a mix of emotions. You have the joy of new birth and family happening at the same time. Talk about two waves kind of colliding. You have this joy on the one hand of my son, and then you have the passing of your father and the tragedy on the other. I'm struggling with that, and obviously that. I'm sorry for you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it was quite the height of joy and the depth of despair. Mm-hmm. It was those extremes in a very short amount of time, and so it really it tested my faith. Mm-hmm. I knew it didn't cause me to doubt God. It caused me to question God, but it didn't cause me to doubt His existence or any of those things. It was just a deep sort of pain that was just like nothing I'd ever felt. I'd had losses before, grandparents and things like that, but nothing so quick, sudden, and drastic and dramatic like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you tell us about the poem?
Yeah, right. So the amazing thing was, this is where God really did show up in a lot of amazing ways throughout that whole time. But there was a special poem. My stepfather wrote poetry regularly and for many, many years, and he finally got to the point where he was recording a lot of those things, or I say recording, writing them down and keeping them. We even had a little booklet made of them and everything. So after they had gone back home from Richmond to Roanoke, after the baby was born, after Brighton was born, he crafted a poem. And the amazing thing was, he put it to me in an email. And so when I finally got back to work at my office after the funeral, after all of that, that was the last email in my inbox from him.
My, what a gift.
So it really was. So if we have time.
Yeah. And let me just check in here. This is Everyday Faith Radio. Jeff Gaffney, your host, and we have Kevin Wirt, my friend, is on the program for the second time. He was on last week. He's on again this week, and he's sharing how God shows up in the middle of pain and suffering and the passing of his father 20 years ago. Yeah.
I was 33. I'm 53 this April. I would have been 33 at that point.
Wow.
So, that's 20 years goes by fast, yes. But at 33 years of age, having had already two sons, and this is my third son, and then boom, just losing my stepfather so suddenly.
Yeah, let's hear that poem.
Yeah, so he wrote this, and it's entitled Thoughts from Brighton. So he's writing as if he's Brighton, the child that was just born. And it's beautiful. I think I may have mentioned last week on the program that my stepfather was quite the evangelist, and I didn't mean that as he was an evangelist, really. He was actually an auto repair man and a tow truck driver. They were selling real estate at the time, but he was not an evangelist like Billy Graham or something like that. He just had a gift for sharing his faith, and so the poem reflects that. It's very short, very sweet. It says, "Tell me about Jesus, whom you love so. Tell me about Jesus, I want to know. Tell me about Jesus as I learn to walk. Then I can tell others as I learn to talk. If I follow your footsteps and study God's word, then I can tell others who have never heard. So be sure to teach me and show me the way so we can meet Jesus some glorious day." And I got to tell you, that just got us through. I read this at the funeral service, and my wife carries this with her in her wallet to this day. It is just a beautiful, beautiful reminder of the grace that God had given him to be able to share with his stepsons and his family.
Wow, that is so powerful. And in so many ways, and what a gift for you to carry. And I just can't imagine discovering that in your email box after everything you'd been through, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe they call that a God wink or something. Here all of a sudden is the most valuable, precious gift you could ever get.
Yeah. And, he surely had no idea that writing that poem and sending me that email that day would be the last thing that he did. The last poem he would write, the last email he would send me. So it is a vivid reminder to me, too, of the brevity of life, the not the futility of life, because I don't believe life is futile in any sort of way, but it is brief, and none of us knows, how much time we're here for.
I obviously never met your father, but I can see what an impact he's had on your life, and how that has really been a blessing to you. Yeah. And so thank you for sharing that story and your journey kind of through the pain of that, but we serve a great God, and it's hard to say that in the middle of loss. But what a beautiful, glorious God that we serve, and He is the answer to all of our pain and suffering that we go through on a day-to-day basis. And when you turn to Him, He can fix the broken heart.
Yes, and He is He truly is the great Comforter, and the Holy Spirit ministered to us in ways during that time that we just didn't understand how God could be there and comfort us and give us joy in the midst of so much pain and loss.
Well, this is Everyday Faith Radio. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more of our interview with Kevin Wirt. Please stay with us.
And in your hour of desperation, know you're not the only one. Praying, Lord above, I need a miracle.
And welcome back to Everyday Faith Radio. This is Jeff Gaffney, your host, and with us again on the program we have my friend Kevin Wirt. Kevin is back with us, and we just kind of walked through some of the pain and suffering that he experienced 20 years ago at the passing of his father. And but at the same time, the joy of the birth of your third son, at the same time the passing of your father, my head is still spinning when I think about that, Kevin. So, but I'm wondering if you could share with our listeners maybe any lessons that you've learned that you could share with our listeners about kind of what came out of that for you during that experience.
Yeah, Jeff, the main lesson I think through that for us at that time was just taking care of yourself, taking care of your family, and having patience, because I have experienced this in our family, and so I've experienced it firsthand. You can imagine when a sudden accident like that happens, and then, you're just practically the same day bringing your baby home from the hospital in Richmond, and you got to think about doing a funeral in Roanoke. It's just like, whoa, wait a minute. The world needs to stop here for a minute, And so thankfully I had a much, beloved pastor in Roanoke at my home church who was able to, encourage us and minister to us from afar, and then family down there. But he was so gracious, and we really struggled with, trying to get that funeral done on Monday. This was Thursday when the accident occurred, and we were like, well, we can probably get this done, on Monday. And I find that a lot of times when there's a sudden tragedy, people just want to get it over with. They just want to do the funeral fast and get it done with and go on like it never happened. Again, it depends on the circumstances. But in our case, we just needed time. We needed time to grieve. We needed time to process this. We had just brought our third child home from the hospital. We were like, at first thought, we were like, well, can we even bring a baby to a funeral in Roanoke with people and all that, and so the baby needed at least one more day to grow a little bit, and so we ended up, all of us being able to go and participate in the funeral. But I also wasn't sure whether I would be able to speak at the funeral, but But I did. I knew that my stepfather wouldn't want anybody else. I mean, the pastor spoke too, and it was wonderful, wonderful service. But I knew that I had to do that, because I knew that he would want me to speak at his service. And so God gave me incredible grace and freedom to do that. But, the funeral didn't happen on Monday. The funeral happened on Tuesday. We pushed it back another day to give us more time to get adjusted and to just grieve and to make sure that we were prepared to really effectively not only honor his memory and grieve well, but just to make it work well for everybody. So I would encourage people, if you go through a sudden tragedy, a sudden loss, don't be quick to just go through the steps that happen, obviously, after a death. Take your time, give space for grief and give space for God to give you the comfort and strength to go forward, because that grieving time is so important and so much needed. And sometimes people just want to move through it too quickly.
Were there any, when we think about the Christian community and life together, were there any key neighbors or acquaintances or old friends that showed up on the scene that just helped kind of keep you stitched together as well?
Yes, countless people. Obviously, as many of us know, when tragedy happens, usually lots of people, come to rally around and support, not only in the church but in the community. And so that's been my experience through the years as a pastor too. When there's a sudden tragedy or unexpected, loss, that people do really want to show their support, and that's a wonderful thing. And so, yes, lots of people did. I'm sure my wife, all my family members could think of special people that were there during that time. The two people that meant the most to me at that time that really were there for us actually came from Richmond. It was our pastor in Richmond at the church we were members of, and then the director of the ministry that I worked for, Buddy Childress, was there, and they participated in the service as well.
Being on the receiving end of people providing ministry of presence, if you will, what would you say to our listeners in terms of how important that is as one who was, the recipient of that? And if you're in a situation where you're not sure I should go, or maybe I should go or shouldn't go, what would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just being there, just showing up is 90% of it, I would say. Sometimes it's just showing up and shutting up, and you don't have to say a lot.
That's a good word.
You don't have to say a whole lot. I think people, fear, what am I going to say? Now, I will say that there are certainly times where you need to say something. At least say I'm sorry. That's the simplest and best and probably easiest thing to say is just say I'm sorry. Sorry for your loss. Sorry this happened. Because there's not a lot of words. I mean, there's no explanation for a lot of these things. Yeah.
This is Everyday Faith Radio. Jeff Gaffney, your host, and we have Kevin Wirt on the program. Kevin, thank you for sharing that about how God shows up on the scene during pain and suffering. I want to shift gears here on the remainder of the show. You and I talked a little bit about the program before the program got started. You're preaching a message coming up on Philemon, and I had to confess to you that, I've read Philemon, but I'm not sure what I was able to really dig out of Philemon. So I'm here for my Philemon lesson from you today, or anywhere you want to go on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Jeff. Actually, I think as this airs this Sunday, I'll be headed down to Farmville to speak in a sweet little church down there, Faith Bible Fellowship. I can name them, I hope. So wonderful little fellowship there. I've spoken there many times, and it's just been a wonderful church. Our kids actually began their homeschooling journey in that co-op at that church. But Philemon is a wonderful little letter of Paul. I was telling you, that it's just so awesome because I am a big fan of fan. That's probably not a good word, but I love Paul's writings. I have been so nourished and encouraged through the writings of Paul, and Philemon is his shortest letter. And some of your readers, listeners may not know this, that all the letters of Paul are just arranged in, it's kind of odd. You'd think there's some great theological order to them. Mm-hmm. It's the order of the longest letter to the shortest letter.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes. So Philemon, being the shortest letter, comes right before Hebrews, which is not written by Paul, most likely. Mm-hmm. Some people want to attribute it to Paul. I think it was Luke, but everybody has their theory. But anyway, Philemon comes right before Hebrews, and it's not necessarily his last letter chronologically, but it's just shortest letter certainly, and but it just has great rich content. But at the end of Philemon, this is where I'm going to focus on Sunday. Paul gives a couple commands here to this runaway slave owner. And it made me think, Jeff, that in a sense we're all like runaway slaves. We're all runaway slaves to sin, and we've run away. And not to spiritualize what obviously was a real historical event here, but in a sense we are all like runaway slaves, and the gospel grabs a hold of us and puts us back to our real master, who's loving and merciful and gracious. And gives us the tools to live out, a life that's not a life of slavery. I mean, it's a slave to God, which is so much better than a slave to sin. But Paul says, so if you, at the end of the letter, he tells Philemon, so whom he loves and whom he appreciates and whom he says, so if you consider me a partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. That's the first command. In other words, treat your former runaway slave here as you would me. Welcome him as you would me. Now, that's gospel because, most of the time we want to treat others as they treat us or whatever. And Paul's saying, no, treat him as you would me. And then he goes on with this kind of thinking. He says, if he's done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me, And here's Paul in prison, too, writing. And he's like, I'll be in your debt, not him. Don't put him in your debt anymore. And he goes on. He says, I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will pay it back. Not to mention that you owe me. It's so great. Paul says, you owe me your very self. Now, what he means by that, it's hard to say. Is it a spiritual thing or is it a literal thing that, he saved his life or something? But he just puts him on notice. By the way, you owe me. Yeah. You owe me, Philemon, on this situation. And then he says, I do wish, brother, that I may have some benefit from you in the Lord. Refresh my heart in Christ. That's another command. Refresh my heart. And then near the end here, he says, confident of your obedience, I write to you, knowing that you will do even more than I ask. And then one thing more, prepare a guest room for me, because I hope to be restored to you in answer to your prayers. So he says, finally he says, hey, I'm coming to check up on you. Make sure that you really do more than I ask. And obviously it seems like Paul's very confident that he will do that. So I choose to believe that Philemon did just what Paul said he would do, more than he asked,
So wrapped in love and forgiveness there is kind of what I just took out of it.
Yes, absolutely. And but I think in terms of reconciling relationships, in terms of reconciling relationships, there is this aspect in which we do need to intervene on behalf of others. We do need to mediate, if you will, on behalf of others. And, charge their debt to me, if need be, but don't hold it against them.
That's a good word. Well, Kevin, it's great to have you on. Second time. Who knows? We might be coming back for the third time, but you've been a blessing to me on this program, and I know our listeners will be blessed by hearing the story that you were able to share with us and sharing the message that you're preaching this weekend. So thank you, and I want to say to you, to your family, and to all of our listeners, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and bring you peace. This is Everyday Faith Radio. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next week.
Broken hearts, let your presence overwhelm. Come restore and make us new. God, we need